Sometimes the smallest sound is the one that changes everything. The sharp tear of a single sheet of paper echoed through the front lobby of the Jefferson County Police Department just after 8 o'clock on an ordinary Tuesday morning. It lasted no more than a second, yet every person standing nearby looked up before quickly returning to their own business, believing they had witnessed nothing more than another routine disagreement at the reception desk. Officer Daniel Brooks, a veteran white police officer with nearly 15 years on the force, held the torn pieces between his fingers for a brief moment before letting them fall into a nearby trash container. A confident smile crossed his face as he dusted off his hands, convinced he had just ended an inconvenient conversation. Across the counter stood Monica Hayes, a black woman dressed in a tailored navy blazer over a crisp white blouse, carrying a well-worn leather briefcase that looked more practical than expensive. She never reached toward the trash can. She never demanded an explanation. She never raised her voice. Instead, she quietly watched the last fragment disappear beneath a stack of discarded paperwork, her expression calm enough to make anyone paying close attention wonder whether she already knew something nobody else did. Around them, deputies exchanged amused looks. A civilian waiting to renew a permit shook his head before returning to his phone. The receptionist resumed typing. Someone laughed softly near the coffee station. To everyone else, the morning continued exactly as expected. Daniel leaned comfortably against the counter and spoke loudly enough for the nearby lobby to hear. If you expect a local police department to take orders from a piece of paper, you came to the wrong place. A few quiet chuckles followed. Monica met his eyes without showing anger or embarrassment. It was never the paper that mattered, she replied in an even voice. Daniel smiled wider, interpreting her composure as surrender. Looks like it does not matter anymore. Monica glanced once toward the large wall clock hanging above the reception area. 8 minutes past the hour. She simply nodded as though confirming something to herself rather than responding to him. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead, while patrol officers walked through the hallway carrying case files and fresh cups of coffee. Dispatch radios crackled with routine traffic. Telephones rang behind closed office doors. Everything about the building suggested another predictable workday. Yet beneath that familiar rhythm, tiny details began slipping quietly out of place. A dispatcher frowned after her secure terminal paused longer than usual before loading. An evidence clerk noticed a routine synchronization request taking several extra seconds. A young officer named Ethan Collins glanced toward the trash container after noticing an unfamiliar blue seal printed on one of the torn fragments before another sheet of paper covered it from view. Nobody connected these moments. Nobody considered them important. Daniel certainly did not. He folded his arms with complete confidence, believing authority belonged to the person wearing the badge rather than the person standing silently across from him. Monica shifted the strap of her leather briefcase onto her shoulder and remained exactly where she was. There was no urgency in her movements, no attempt to explain herself, and no sign that she intended to leave. She looked less like someone waiting for permission and more like someone patiently allowing time to reveal what words never could. Outside the precinct, several blocks away, dark government vehicles turned onto Jefferson Avenue one after another, moving steadily through the morning traffic without flashing lights, without sirens, and without attracting attention. The ordinary day had not changed yet. It simply had not reached the moment when everyone inside the building would finally understand what the sound of tearing paper had truly set into motion. The uneasy silence lingering in the lobby went unnoticed by most people, because ordinary mornings have a way of convincing everyone that nothing truly unexpected can happen. Deputy clerks continued sorting paperwork behind the reception counter. Patrol officers exchanged brief conversations before heading back onto the streets. A coffee machine hummed in the break area while a television, mounted in one corner, quietly reported the morning weather forecast. Everything looked familiar. Everything felt routine. Yet Monica Hayes remained exactly where she had been since Officer Daniel Brooks had torn the sealed document apart. She neither protested nor attempted to retrieve the pieces from the trash container. Instead, she rested one hand lightly on the handle of her leather briefcase and calmly watched the second hand sweep across the large clock mounted above the lobby. Daniel noticed her standing there and gave a confident smile that suggested the conversation had already ended in his favor. "You are still here?" he asked with a hint of amusement. Monica answered in the same steady voice she had used from the beginning. Yes. Nothing more. No explanation. No complaint. Her simple response somehow unsettled the young officer, Ethan Collins, far more than an angry outburst would have. During his academy training, instructors had repeatedly emphasized that confidence often appeared in unexpected forms. Looking at Monica now, Ethan could not shake the feeling that she was waiting for something very specific rather than hoping someone might change their mind. His attention drifted toward the trash container where one corner of the torn document remained visible beneath a stack of discarded forms. As another deputy casually tossed away an empty coffee cup, the paper shifted just enough for Ethan to notice part of a blue federal seal and several partially visible words. He could clearly read United States before the remaining text disappeared beneath another sheet of paper. A quiet sense of concern settled in his mind. He considered asking Daniel whether he had looked closely at the document before destroying it, but the confidence in Daniel's posture discouraged the question. At that same moment, the dispatcher frowned at her computer screen. A secure communications window had frozen unexpectedly before displaying a message requesting temporary preservation of transmission records. She tried refreshing the system, assuming it was another software delay, but the notice remained. Down the hallway, the evidence technician paused after discovering that the digital inventory system required an additional verification step that had never appeared during previous shifts. In the records office, a printer unexpectedly stopped halfway through a report before automatically restarting without explanation. None of these small interruptions created panic. They simply felt unusual enough to make experienced employees exchange puzzled looks. Daniel dismissed every inconvenience with a wave of his hand. Technology chooses the worst possible days to act up, he muttered while signing another routine report. Monica quietly glanced toward the front entrance as sunlight reflected across the glass doors. Outside, morning traffic continued moving through Jefferson Avenue exactly as it always did, but several blocks away a line of dark government vehicles turned onto the same street with calm precision, blending into the flow of ordinary commuters without attracting attention. There were no flashing lights, no hurried movements, and no indication that anything extraordinary was approaching. Inside the precinct, nobody except Monica seemed aware that time itself had quietly divided the morning into two separate moments. One belonged to the assumptions everyone had made only minutes earlier. The other was already moving steadily toward the front doors, carrying answers that would soon replace every confident conclusion with undeniable reality. Officer Ethan Collins tried to return to his morning paperwork, but the image of the torn document refused to leave his mind. He had only caught a brief glimpse of the blue seal before it disappeared beneath discarded forms. Yet years of careful instruction at the police academy had taught him that official federal markings were never placed on routine paperwork by accident. He quietly walked toward the reception desk, pretending to organize a stack of visitor forms while stealing another glance at the trash container. This time, one torn fragment rested just high enough for him to recognize another line of print beneath the seal. The words "sealed arrest warrant" were still visible despite the damaged page. Before he could lean any closer, Officer Daniel Brooks noticed him. "Do not worry about garbage," Daniel said with a dismissive grin. "It belongs exactly where it is." Ethan forced a polite smile, but something about Daniel's confidence no longer felt reassuring. He had expected Monica Hayes to argue, demand a supervisor, or insist that the document be recovered. Instead, she remained quietly composed, standing with both hands resting lightly on her leather briefcase, as though she had accepted that the next chapter of the morning no longer depended on anything inside the precinct. That calm presence slowly became the most unusual thing in the room. People facing unfair treatment usually searched for someone willing to listen. Monica searched only for the wall clock. Every few moments her eyes drifted toward it before returning to the front entrance. It was almost as though she was measuring time rather than waiting for permission. Across the lobby, the dispatcher attempted once again to reconnect the secure communications terminal. Instead of the familiar login screen, another message appeared requesting that all electronic records remain available for preservation until further notice. She quietly called Sergeant Michael Turner over to review the notification. Michael studied the screen for several seconds before frowning. "Do not clear anything," he instructed. "Leave the system exactly as it is." The records clerk experienced a similar surprise when archived files unexpectedly switched into read-only status, preventing routine edits until administrative verification could be completed. None of the employees understood why unrelated systems were behaving in the same unusual way, yet no alarms sounded and no emergency announcements interrupted the morning. The changes were subtle, orderly, and strangely deliberate. Daniel dismissed every concern with another confident shrug. "Government software has a mind of its own," he joked, drawing a few uncertain laughs from nearby deputies. Monica heard the remark but offered no response. She simply looked through the glass entrance as a faint reflection of dark vehicles moved across the parking lot outside. Ethan instinctively followed her gaze and noticed the first black sport utility vehicle easing into a parking space across from the main entrance. A second vehicle arrived moments later, followed by another, each stopping with quiet precision and leaving perfect distance between one another. No emergency lights flashed. No doors opened immediately. The drivers remained inside as though waiting for the exact right moment. The ordinary sounds inside the precinct suddenly seemed louder than before. The soft tapping of computer keyboards, the distant ringing of telephones, and the steady hum of fluorescent lights all blended into an uneasy silence that no one could explain. Ethan felt a quiet certainty settle over him. Whatever had begun with the sound of tearing paper was no longer a disagreement between a police officer and a visitor. Something much larger had already arrived, and for reasons he could not yet understand, the calmest person in the entire building was the woman everyone else had underestimated. The first set of doors opened so quietly that almost nobody looked up. Government employees visited the precinct from time to time, and nothing about the arrival seemed unusual at first glance. Two men and a woman entered wearing dark business suits beneath lightweight jackets, each carrying a slim leather portfolio instead of a briefcase. Their movements were calm, deliberate, and remarkably coordinated. They did not pause to study the lobby because they behaved like people who already knew exactly where they were going. Officer Ethan Collins watched them from across the room and immediately noticed something different. None of them wore local law enforcement insignia, yet every step reflected the quiet discipline he had seen only in advanced interagency training demonstrations. One of the visitors approached the reception counter and spoke in a courteous voice. "Good morning. We would like to speak with the officer assigned to the front desk." Daniel Brooks stepped forward without hesitation. "That would be me. What can I do for you?" The visitor removed a leather credential wallet just long enough for Daniel and Sergeant Michael Turner to see the identification inside before closing it again. Daniel's confident expression remained unchanged, but Michael's posture became noticeably more attentive. "Is there a problem?" Daniel asked. "We are here regarding a federal matter," the visitor replied. "Please remain available while we complete our initial verification." The answer was polite, yet it carried a quiet certainty that immediately changed the atmosphere inside the building. Nobody raised a voice. Nobody gave dramatic commands. Even so, conversations around the lobby gradually faded as deputies sensed that something important was unfolding. Daniel attempted another smile. "If this is about paperwork, I am sure we can clear it up quickly." The visitor simply nodded. "That is our intention." Across the lobby, Monica Hayes remained exactly where she had been standing all morning. She neither approached the visitors nor attempted to identify herself. Instead, she calmly adjusted the strap of her leather briefcase and glanced once toward the wall clock before returning her attention to the front entrance. Ethan noticed the subtle exchange of eye contact between Monica and one member of the arriving team. It lasted less than a second, but it was unmistakable. It was the silent acknowledgement of professionals who already recognized one another. Daniel never noticed it. His attention shifted toward another deputy complaining that several electronic records had unexpectedly entered preservation status. "Everything is acting strange today," Daniel muttered. "First the computers, now this." Outside the precinct, additional black sport utility vehicles rolled quietly into the parking lot, each parking with careful precision while leaving clear access to every entrance. No emergency lights flashed. No sirens echoed through the neighborhood. People walking along the sidewalk barely glanced in their direction because nothing about the arrival appeared urgent. Yet inside the building, the weight of anticipation continued to grow. Ethan looked toward the trash container one more time and then back at Monica. For the first time that morning, he stopped wondering who she was and began asking a far more important question. What kind of responsibility required this level of preparation before a single explanation had even been given? The answer had not yet been spoken aloud, but every quiet movement inside the lobby suggested that the truth was already standing just outside the reach of everyone who believed they understood what had happened only a few minutes earlier. Officer Daniel Brooks folded his arms with the same confidence he had carried all morning, convinced the unexpected visitors had simply arrived to resolve a routine administrative misunderstanding. Years of experience had taught him that official meetings usually began with paperwork, signatures, and brief conversations before everyone returned to normal. Nothing about the quiet demeanor of the federal representatives suggested urgency, yet nothing about their composure suggested uncertainty either. The lead official calmly removed a secure tablet from a slim portfolio and reviewed several entries before speaking into a discreet communications device clipped beneath his jacket. His voice remained so quiet that nobody standing nearby could hear the words, but almost immediately another pair of black sport utility vehicles entered the parking lot outside. They moved slowly through the rows of parked patrol cars before stopping in carefully measured positions near separate entrances to the building. There were still no flashing lights, no raised voices, and no dramatic display of authority. Everything unfolded with disciplined precision. Inside the precinct, dispatch supervisors suddenly received an automated advisory instructing them to preserve all communication logs until further notice. Sergeant Michael Turner quietly confirmed the notice before directing every dispatcher to leave active systems exactly as they were. "Do not delete anything," he said in a calm voice. "Leave every record untouched." The instruction puzzled several deputies, but nobody questioned it. At nearly the same moment, the evidence technician received a notification requesting temporary preservation of all digital inventory records associated with the morning shift. The requests arrived through ordinary government channels, yet their timing transformed the atmosphere inside the building. Daniel looked towards Sergeant Turner with growing confusion. "What exactly is happening?" Michael answered honestly, "I do not know yet." Those 5 words carried far more weight than anyone expected. It was the first time that morning Daniel had heard his supervisor admit uncertainty. Across the lobby, Monica Hayes quietly watched each development without showing surprise. She neither smiled nor appeared satisfied. Instead, she carried herself with the same steady professionalism she had displayed since entering the building, as though every step unfolding around her matched a procedure she already understood. Officer Ethan Collins noticed that one member of the federal team briefly looked toward Monica before giving an almost imperceptible nod. She acknowledged it with the slightest movement of her head before returning her attention to the front entrance. No words were exchanged, yet the silent recognition between them spoke volumes. Outside, additional federal personnel calmly positioned themselves near each public entrance without preventing anyone from leaving or entering. They simply maintained an organized presence that reflected preparation rather than confrontation. Citizens arriving for routine business were politely asked to remain in the waiting area while administrative verification continued. The courtesy shown to everyone only deepened the mystery. If this had been an emergency, the scene would have looked entirely different. Instead, it resembled professionals carefully protecting a process that had already begun long before they arrived. Daniel glanced once more toward the trash container holding the torn fragments of the sealed document. For the first time since he had ripped the paper apart, a quiet feeling of doubt entered his mind. The confidence that had seemed unshakable only minutes earlier now rested against questions he could no longer dismiss. He slowly realized that the morning had never been about winning an argument with a visitor. It had always been about understanding something he had failed to recognize before making a decision. And as the lobby settled into an almost complete silence, every person inside the precinct sensed that the most important explanation had still not been spoken. The lead federal representative closed the secure tablet, looked around the lobby with quiet confidence, and then walked directly toward Monica Hayes. Every conversation inside the precinct faded without anyone being asked to lower their voice. Deputies paused in the middle of routine paperwork. The dispatcher stopped typing. Even the citizens waiting on the metal benches sensed that something significant was unfolding. The representative stopped a respectful distance from Monica and offered a brief nod. "Good morning, Ms. Hayes. Thank you for your patience." Monica returned the greeting with the same calm professionalism she had shown since entering the building. "Good morning. I appreciate your prompt response." The exchange lasted only a few seconds, but it changed everything. Officer Ethan Collins immediately understood what Daniel Brooks had failed to recognize from the beginning. These people were not meeting Monica for the first time. They already knew exactly who she was. Daniel stared at them, searching for an explanation that no longer fit the assumptions he had made earlier that morning. "You know her?" he asked before anyone else could speak. The lead representative turned toward him with a composed expression. "Yes, Officer Brooks. Ms. Hayes is expected." Daniel frowned. Expected for what? The representative opened the secure folder he had been carrying and carefully reviewed a page before answering. "Ms. Hayes is the Senior Federal Operations Coordinator assigned to oversee the protected transfer of sealed judicial materials between federal and local authorities." She was carrying documentation connected to an active federal process. The words settled over the lobby with remarkable weight. Nobody reacted immediately because everyone seemed to need a moment to understand what they had just heard. Ethan slowly looked toward the trash container holding the torn fragments of the document. Suddenly, every unusual event from the morning made perfect sense. The preservation notices, the communication alerts, the synchronized arrival of federal personnel. None of it had been random. Every step had followed established procedure long before anyone inside the precinct realized that a protected federal process had been interrupted. Daniel tried to steady his voice. No one identified her. The representative answered without hesitation. "Federal protocol does not require public disclosure of protected assignments. Local agencies are expected to verify official documentation through established procedures before taking administrative action." Daniel lowered his eyes for a brief moment. For the first time since Monica had entered the building, certainty gave way to reflection. Monica herself showed no sign of satisfaction. She simply spoke in the same measured tone that had defined every word she had said throughout the morning. The document was important because it represented a chain of trust, not because it was a single sheet of paper. No accusation followed. No criticism. Only a quiet statement of principle. Around the lobby, several deputies exchanged uncomfortable glances as they replayed the morning in their minds. Ethan realized that the biggest mistake had not been made when the document was torn. It had begun much earlier, the moment assumptions replaced verification. Outside, the black government vehicles remained parked beneath the brightening afternoon sky, their presence no longer mysterious but understandable. Inside the precinct, the atmosphere had completely changed. Monica Hayes looked exactly the same as she had when she first walked through the front doors, calm, respectful, and composed, because the authority she carried had never depended on recognition. It had existed from the very beginning, waiting only for the truth to arrive in its own time. The quiet that settled over the precinct no longer came from uncertainty. It came from understanding. The lead federal representative carefully closed the secure folder before addressing everyone gathered in the lobby. His voice remained calm, measured, and professional. "Our responsibility today is straightforward. We are here to preserve the integrity of a protected federal process and to document every action related to the interruption of that process." No one interrupted him. No one challenged his authority. The confidence that had filled the room only an hour earlier had given way to careful attention. Sergeant Michael Turner immediately instructed every division supervisor to cooperate fully with the federal review. Dispatch supervisors preserved communication logs exactly as they had been received. The records division secured visitor records without modification. Evidence personnel verified digital inventory reports while ensuring that nothing was altered or removed. Every department inside the building quietly shifted from routine operations to procedural preservation. Officer Daniel Brooks remained beside the reception counter, watching each step unfold with growing reflection. He glanced once toward the trash container where the torn fragments of the sealed document had rested only minutes before. A federal evidence specialist, wearing protective gloves, carefully recovered each piece and placed them into a transparent evidence sleeve. The gesture surprised Daniel more than anything else that morning. The paper itself could never restore what had happened, Yet every fragment still mattered because every detail helped preserve an accurate record. Monica Hayes observed the process without satisfaction or resentment. Instead, she thanked the evidence specialist for handling the material with care before quietly stepping aside to allow everyone room to work. Ethan Collins noticed that simple act immediately. Even after being publicly dismissed and underestimated, Monica continued treating every person around her with courtesy and respect. That quiet professionalism carried more influence than any speech could have delivered. One member of the federal team then approached Daniel and handed him a formal administrative notice explaining that the incident would undergo review through established interagency procedures. The representative spoke with complete neutrality. This document explains the preservation process and the next administrative steps. It does not represent a conclusion. It ensures that every relevant fact will be reviewed fairly. Daniel accepted the notice with both hands and slowly read each page before lowering it. His expression no longer reflected embarrassment alone. It reflected the realization that every professional decision begins long before paperwork is signed. It begins with the willingness to verify facts before forming conclusions. Across the lobby, deputies quietly returned to their assigned responsibilities, although the conversations that resumed sounded noticeably different from those heard earlier that morning. They were softer, more thoughtful, and filled with the awareness that assumptions can influence actions long before evidence has the opportunity to speak. Outside, the black government vehicles remained parked beneath the bright afternoon sky, standing as silent reminders that genuine authority rarely announces itself through spectacle. It reveals itself through preparation, discipline, and respect for established procedure. Ethan looked once more toward Monica Hayes and understood that the strongest person in the building had never been the one speaking the loudest. Strength had been standing quietly at the reception desk from the very beginning, trusting that truth would arrive without anger and that integrity would never need to compete with pride. As the federal review continued according to procedure, the entire precinct became a lesson that every officer present would remember long after reports were filed and records were archived, because the law protects its credibility not through assumptions, but through patience, fairness, and the discipline to let verified facts speak before personal judgment ever does. By early afternoon, the federal review had settled into a steady rhythm that reflected discipline rather than urgency. Every request was documented. Every conversation was recorded through ordinary administrative procedures. Nothing about the process resembled punishment. Instead, it demonstrated the quiet strength of institutions designed to protect public trust through transparency and accountability. Monica Hayes sat at a conference table alongside the federal representatives, carefully reviewing reconstructed copies of the damage documentation while local supervisors cooperated with each verification request. The torn original no longer determined the outcome because secure federal records had already preserved every essential detail long before the paper entered the precinct. The document itself had been damaged, but the legal process behind it had never been placed at risk. That realization brought visible relief to several employees who had feared far greater consequences. Sergeant Michael Turner thanked the federal team for explaining each procedural step as it unfolded. The lead representative answered with a calm smile. Strong partnerships are built through understanding. Our responsibility is not only to protect federal processes, but also to help local agencies strengthen future cooperation. Those words surprised many people in the room. They had expected confrontation. Instead, they found professionalism. Officer Ethan Collins quietly listened from the back of the conference room, absorbing every detail. He realized that the most valuable lesson of the day had nothing to do with ranks, titles, or jurisdiction. It concerned the discipline required to pause before making assumptions about another person. Daniel Brooks remained unusually quiet throughout the meeting. His confidence had been replaced by careful reflection, and he followed every explanation with complete attention. When the review paused for a brief moment, he looked toward Monica Hayes and spoke in a steady voice. I made a decision before I understood the situation. That was my responsibility, and I recognize that now. The room became silent once again. Monica looked at him without anger or satisfaction. Every professional has difficult days, she replied. What matters is whether we learn enough from them to protect the next person who walks through the same door. Her answer carried no bitterness. It offered a standard rather than a judgment. Ethan noticed several deputies quietly nod in agreement because everyone understood the deeper meaning behind her words. Policies could always be revised. Procedures could always be improved. Character, however, was revealed in moments when no one expected accountability to arrive. Outside the precinct, several of the black government vehicles quietly departed. After receiving confirmation that the preservation process had been completed successfully, the remaining representatives finalized their reports before thanking the local staff for their cooperation. The atmosphere inside the building felt entirely different from the tense uncertainty that had filled the lobby only hours earlier. Conversations became thoughtful rather than defensive. Routine duties resumed with greater care. Even small interactions between deputies and visitors reflected a noticeable change in patience and respect. Ethan watched an elderly citizen approach the reception counter with a simple question, and this time every officer waited, listened, and verified the facts before offering assistance. It was a small moment that might have gone unnoticed on any other day, yet after everything that had happened, it symbolized something much greater. Monica gathered her briefcase, exchanged professional farewells with the federal team, and prepared to leave without seeking recognition for anything she had done. She had never arrived looking for attention. She had arrived carrying responsibility, and by remaining calm when others chose assumptions over understanding, she had reminded everyone inside the precinct that genuine authority is measured not by the power to command others, but by the discipline to uphold fairness even when no one realizes who is standing before them. Several weeks later, the morning inside the precinct looked almost identical to countless mornings that had come before, yet the people inside the building were no longer the same. Visitors entered through the same front doors. Dispatch radios carried the same steady flow of routine calls. Patrol officers prepared for another ordinary shift. The familiar rhythm of public service had returned, but beneath that routine lived a quiet awareness that every first impression carried consequences far beyond a single conversation. Officer Ethan Collins noticed the difference almost immediately. Every visitor was greeted with greater patience. Every document was examined with greater care. Every question received a complete answer before assumptions had the opportunity to shape decisions. The changes were not announced through speeches or new slogans displayed on the walls. They appeared through everyday actions repeated consistently until they became part of the culture of the department. Sergeant Michael Turner had introduced additional verification procedures for sensitive documents, emphasizing that professionalism begins with respect for process rather than confidence in personal judgment. The policy updates required only a few extra minutes during intake, yet everyone understood that those few minutes protected both the public and the officers entrusted to serve them. Daniel Brooks accepted every new procedure without complaint. The confidence that had once encouraged quick conclusions had gradually been replaced by thoughtful discipline. He asked more questions before making decisions. He listened longer before responding. Colleagues quietly noticed the difference because genuine growth rarely arrives through dramatic moments. It appears one careful choice at a time. One afternoon, a young black father entered the precinct carrying a sealed envelope while holding the hand of his daughter. The child looked nervous as they approached the reception counter. Daniel greeted them with a calm smile and politely asked how he could help. Before touching the envelope, he carefully verified the instructions printed across its front, contacted the appropriate office, and waited for confirmation exactly as procedure required. Only after every detail had been verified did he accept the document. The father thanked him for taking the time to do everything correctly. Daniel simply replied, "Everyone deserves to have their paperwork handled with care." Ethan overheard the exchange from across the lobby and quietly smiled because he understood the deeper meaning hidden inside those ordinary words. Somewhere else in Washington, Monica Hayes continued carrying out the same responsibilities she had fulfilled long before that unforgettable morning. She never spoke publicly about what had happened inside the precinct because she believed the greatest victories for justice rarely required public celebration. If one department improved its practices, if one officer became more careful, if one citizen received fair treatment because someone chose verification over assumption, then the lesson had already accomplished its purpose. Months later, the administrative review concluded with recommendations focused on strengthening training, improving communication between agencies, and reinforcing professional standards across every level of cooperation. The outcome reflected accountability without unnecessary spectacle, because lasting trust is built through consistent improvement rather than public humiliation. Looking back, Ethan often remembered that the entire chain of events had begun with something almost impossible to hear: the quiet sound of paper being torn apart. At the time, it had seemed insignificant. In reality, it had exposed something much larger than a damaged document. It revealed the difference between authority built on assumption and authority grounded in integrity. Badges may identify responsibility, titles may identify positions, and official seals may identify institutions, but none of them can replace the simple discipline of treating every person with dignity before knowing their story. Because in the end, the strongest form of justice never arrived with flashing lights or raised voices. It arrived quietly, carrying nothing more powerful than truth, patience, and the courage to let character speak before judgment ever could.